Technologies are developed, used for a while, and then they often become obsolete. Who among you still has a typewriter or a telex machine in your office? I hope at least some of you in this webinar feel that way about hand pumps, that they're old hat, they're obsolete. Otherwise, we'll be preaching to the converted. But maybe the hand pump is more like the bicycle, more than 200 years old and still evolving. Let's see. In 2015, I presented a paper at the International Association of Hydrogeologists conference in Rome, which I entitled "Long Live the Humble Hand Pump." And in that presentation, I drew attention to the view that was becoming more common, in which some people say that hand pumps in rural Africa and Asia have had their day. They're too difficult to manage. And pumping should use solar energy, which is getting cheaper and cheaper. And furthermore, our ambition should be piped, treated, and household connections for everybody. Now, I'm going to say something a little bit different. That many dispersed small communities will continue to need hand pumps, boreholes, well beyond 2030, the end of the SDG period. Perhaps for another 2 or 3 decades even. We do know that the performance of such point sources needs a lot of improvement, but a few simple measures by engineers, by hydrogeologists and decision makers could really improve the performance of hand pumps very significantly. A hand pump here in Zambia provides a basic water service for the community. But it is prone to breakdown. Reliability is an issue. Functionality is lower than we would like to see. So we do need better pump designs and quality control of the manufacture of hand pumps and the manufacture and supply of spare parts. Of course, it's one thing to have a design, it's one thing to have better quality control, but we also need to see adoption and uptake of any improvements that are made. And that all needs to be set in the background of improvements to the siting of boreholes, the design of boreholes, the supervision of construction, and then the completion, the testing, and so on that follow the completion of a borehole. So improvements to pump designs fit within a wider ecosystem, which involves not only the pumping technology, but also the borehole and the groundwater resources on which that borehole depends. Who's using hand pumps now? Well, the obvious place to start is people who use point groundwater sources. And in the publicly available data, what that refers to is people using boreholes, wells, or springs. But of course, many open wells, many springs don't have pumps of any sort. And so we need to narrow down the focus a little bit. Users of boreholes and protected wells, well, again, users of both those sources may include motorized pumps, and a protected hand dug well may use a windlass and a bucket rather than a pump. In trying to figure out who's using hand pumps in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll say a little bit about South Asia and Southeast Asia in a moment, the Stop the Rot study found that nearly 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa are reliant on about 700,000 hand pumps as their main source of drinking water. We don't know the numbers in Asia, but it could be that there are another several 100 million people there. We just haven't done the detailed analysis. But the Stop the Rot study concluded that about 19% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa rely on hand pumps for their main drinking water supply. Of course, there were a lot of assumptions behind those estimates, which I won't go through in detail, but they're summarized at the bottom of that slide. Now, the question is, will there be similar user communities in 2030 at the end of the SDG period, in 2040 and beyond? Of course, there's the trend towards piped systems, treated systems, solar pumped systems, such as the one in the photograph here in northern Kenya. There are obvious issues associated with a transition to these sort of technologies, and cost and management are the two primary factors that need to be taken into account. But there are hidden issues too about water resources, about the consideration of water quality and supply quantities involved. There's an issue of economy of scale too. Solar systems are often most cost effective for larger communities, although in the next slide I'll mention a couple of options which can result in direct swap out of a hand pump for a solar option. So the two direct swap out options that I know of are the Lorentz submersible pump, the PS2 100, and a more recent example, the impact pump, the SLX 40. But it's still, if we want to compare solar and hand pumps, one of my colleagues refers to this not as comparing apples and pears, but apples and bricks. They are so dissimilar. A hand pump, of course, involves manual lift. There's no storage to cover downtimes. A solar pump, on the other hand, involves motorized lift. There's always water storage involved, which can keep the users supplied for a period of hours or days, depending on how big that storage capacity is. The Lorentz system is a small submersible pump, but with some smart technology which enables electronic payment. The impact pump is a very different kind of technology where the big focus in the design of the unit has been on reliability. It's based on the hydraulic ram principle, and in effect it's a lift extender driven by a solar pump at the surface. So it brings all the challenges of repairs and maintenance to the surface rather than in the down the hole components. Solar pumping, of course, offers easier options for electronic payments, as well as remote fault monitoring and even groundwater monitoring of water levels and water quality. There are some issues. I've already alluded to the fact that solar pumping systems provide inevitably a higher level of service. But because of cost, some designers of solar pump systems design for only enough water for drinking and cooking and not for the larger amounts of water that are necessary for hygiene and other domestic uses. And there is an issue around the possibility for aquifers to support higher abstraction rates than hand pumps. A recent study in West Africa, here's a diagram from that study showing for the the basement complex geology, broken down into a number of different categories, what the likelihood of different yield classes is. So, for example, if you look at the bottom part of that chart, the combined data for all the different subcategories of the basement, about 13% of boreholes could only support a yield less than 0.1 litre per second, so less than a normal hand pump would demand. The red block shows the likelihood of the borehole being able to support something in the region of 0.1 to 0.5 litres per second, so comfortably supply a hand pump. And then you see the smaller probabilities as you move to the right of the diagram for the higher yields that we might be looking at for either solar irrigation or larger solar systems for bigger communities. There is a point here that's important, and that is that we can't look at the comparative costs of hand pumps and solar in isolation from the likely revenues and the effectiveness of the management arrangements. And usually if a hand pump were to be swapped out for a solar alternative, then it's not just a matter of changing the technology, but there would be a much greater focus on revenue collection and on professionalized management, which is necessary for the solar option, but which may also be more effective in terms of functionality and reliability. So although the real capital and recurrent costs of solar alternatives are significantly higher, a related issue, it seems, is that consumers are much more willing to pay for the higher level of service that they're likely to get from a solar system. I'll put this chart up now where you see that only on average in this particular study, 30% of rural households were paying for water at all. And there is evidence that users of solar systems may be willing to pay more. The third bullet point on this slide makes the point that a hand pump managed by an individual water user committee can't offer the scale, the economies of scale and the opportunities for cross subsidies in the way that it's possible with a professionalized management where wealthier and poorer communities are brought together under one service provider. The final bullet point on the slide is to say that if there is insufficient sunshine, or when a nearby solar system that people are using is being repaired, they may revert to the hand pump, or they may prefer to use the hand pump to avoid the higher costs of solar pumped water. In thinking about alternatives to hand pumps, the leave no one behind principle is important. And you may be wondering from what I've said so far whether I'm in favour of professionalised solar pump services in which users pay a reasonable tariff. And the answer is yes. But it's a yes but. Out of sub-Saharan Africa's 635 million rural people, 200 million, as we've seen, are served by hand pumps, which often fail, which break down regularly. And there are another 146 million using unimproved sources, that is, open wells and so on, or open water, and some of them could be served by hand pumps too. There may be even larger numbers in Asia. We just don't have the analysis of the data at this stage. Some of the reliability challenges of hand pumps have been known for a long time. The Design Outreach Project, which is the focus of this webinar, aims to address some of these. This is an example of the corrosion of a galvanized iron rising main on an India Mark II hand pump in northern Uganda. So coming back to my starting point, long live the humble hand pump? Well, yes, especially if it really can live longer and serve communities more reliably. And that's what we seek to achieve in this project. I'm in favour of the transition to solar, but hand pumps have a really important part to play, and we need to work hard to make them serve their communities more reliably. Thank you.